All right. Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Making the Case for Open at Your Institution. This is part 3 of 4 webinars on open access, copyright, and Creative Commons, and I'm very glad that you're with us today. I'm Kirsten Erickson. I am a member of the Core Continuing Education Committee, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. Our presenter is Shana Hollich, the Learning and Training Manager for Creative Commons. I'm going to share my screen. Oops, sorry. There we go. Before we get started, here are a few logistics for today's presentation. All attendees are muted to prevent background noise. You can utilize the Zoom chat function to comment or communicate with other attendees, and also to ask questions of the presenters. If you need technical support, send a message directly to me. We will have time for questions after the presentation, and I will read out any that are added to the chat. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive an email with links to the recording and the presentation slides shortly after the presentation concludes. CORE is committed to providing a harassment-free environment for everyone, regardless of gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, disability, physical appearance, ethnicity, religion, or other group identity. To that end, all webinar participants, including speakers and attendees, must comply with the CORE Statement of Conduct. I will drop this link into the chat in just a minute. Please contact me through private chat or email jreese@ala.org if you experience or witness any violations of the code. All right. Oops, sorry. And with that, I would like to welcome Shana. And it's all yours, Shana.
Okay. There we go. My screen share should be coming up here. Let me arrange all my windows the way I want to. Hi, folks. Welcome to this CORE webinar. Thank you to Kirsten and Mia and the rest of the CORE folks for giving me the opportunity to talk to you all today and for running this series. Most of you were probably here last week or even the week before. This is part 3 of a 4-part series that Creative Commons has been doing for CORE. And this week we're going to specifically talk about how to use and find open resources, CC licensed resources, and how to make the case for open at your own institution. So I'm hoping we're going to use the chat quite a bit today. Last week was a lot of me talking, for those of you who were here. This week is going to start with a lot of me talking, and then I'm hoping we have more time for discussion. I'm really hoping to hear from you folks, sort of what challenges you're facing in your own workplaces, and kind of what how open can kind of help meet some of your needs. So I'm hoping you all can put in the chat just a quick introduction, your name, where you work, maybe geographically where you're located, just so we can get a sense. You know, I'd love to know, do we have a lot of academic librarians here with us today, public librarians, special librarians? We're all special librarians is a lame joke I like to make. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Shana Hollich. I'm coming to you today from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, kind of south central Pennsylvania, very close to Maryland. I'm actually kind of very in that Washington, D.C. metro area, weirdly enough. I'm the Learning and Training Manager here at Creative Commons, and before that, I was a librarian for 15 years. I ended my career as an academic library director and then a public library director. Before that, I did a lot of stuff in tech services, cataloging, collections development, government documents for NOAA for a little while, a little bit of systems librarianship. I kind of bounced around all over the place. So yeah, seeing some great introductions in the chat, some university librarians, someone at the Frick Art Reference Library, which is great. Cal Poly, University of Saskatchewan, very cool. So what I'm seeing at the moment is a lot of academic institutions, which is great. A lot of this information will be relevant for you. A media specialist at the public library, awesome. We will also make sure we have some good public library examples too. So let's see here. Slides. This question has appeared in every webinar and I'm just going to skip right over it, to be honest. If you would like to put in the chat, if there's anything top of mind for you or something you really want to take away from this session, do feel free to put that in the chat, and I will try to make sure I address it. In general, there is a Q&A feature where you can type your questions. This time around, we're also going to be using the chat quite a bit, I hope. So also do feel free to put comments, questions, thoughts, concerns in that chat space. For those of you who were here last week, I was traveling. I had kind of a weird setup. I'm at home again today, in my office. I have all my screens. I can see all the chat, so I can follow along pretty easily. For those of you who aren't familiar with Creative Commons, just a real quick rundown. We're a global nonprofit organization that exists because we believe that access and sharing of culture and knowledge are essential to sustain vibrant and thriving societies. We work towards equitable sharing of knowledge and culture in the public interest. So, over 20 years ago, we created these Creative Commons licenses and public domain tools. We talked a lot about those last week, the specifics of the licenses and how they work. If there are any lingering questions, do feel free to put those in the chat or the Q&A box. We're not going to specifically talk about the mechanics of the licenses and the public domain tools today, but if you still have copyright questions or license questions, we will probably have time. You can absolutely bring those up. So, we're a nonprofit organization. We created these licenses, and we're also part of this global network, this movement of lawyers, activists, educators, librarians, teachers, folks who work in copyright law and open education, open culture, open science, and who are interested in providing more equitable access to the world's knowledge and culture. So we're here to give you creative tools that will help you with your work. Okay, so last week we talked a lot about how the CC licenses work. We saw all the different icons, attribution, share alike, non-commercial, no derivatives. We learned about CC0, the public domain tool. But say you actually want, we know CC licenses exist. That's really great. How do I find them? How do I use CC licensed content? The good news is that you are probably already interacting with openly licensed content in your day-to-day life, maybe without even realizing it. So Wikipedia, of course, is one of the biggest sort of repositories for CC licensed content. All the articles on Wikipedia are licensed with a CC by SA license, which means you are free to use anything that you find on Wikipedia, to download it, to share it, to reuse it, so long as you attribute the author and the source. So you have to give Wikipedia credit. If there's a specific person's name associated with it, great, give them credit. And if you make any derivative works based on stuff you get from Wikipedia, you need to also license your derivative with a share alike license. That's what that share alike means. So Wikipedia is really dedicated to openly licensing their material and also keeping it, even the adaptations and derivatives of that material, keeping it open. They're one of the big places that's really part of this open movement. Wikipedia has a bunch of different sort of sub-sites that you might be familiar with. There's WikiEDU, which is focused on education. Wikiversity has online classes and things. And there's also Wikimedia Commons, which is probably the other one people seem to know. If you've ever downloaded images, Wikimedia Commons is like basically a really big image and file repository. Everything on there also is CC licensed or in the public domain. That's one of their requirements. So there's over 6 million articles, almost 7 million just in English on Wikipedia. And of course, there are many, many more. But where else? Flickr is another really big user of CC licenses. There are many, many, many CC licensed photographs on Flickr that are available for you to download and use, especially if you're looking for images for PowerPoint presentations or for backgrounds on a website or anything else you might need images for. Flickr allows you to search specifically for works that are CC licensed. And this is just a screenshot of their website that kind of shows you a little bit about how that works. There are several other websites. These are just some examples. Most of these are related to museums, libraries, archives. Flickr Commons. Europeana is a really big repository for GLAM institutions in Europe. GLAM being galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. So the sorts of places you folks work. Smithsonian has a large open access collection. The Met has a large open access collection, including both CC licensed works and public domain works. Oops. Yeah, I was going to put this in the chat. So there's actually an enormous document that we started a while back, and that we could definitely update and add to, that just shows a ton of places where you can find CC licensed works, open works that you can download, use, share, not only for free, as in they don't cost any money, but also freely, as in there are far fewer copyright restrictions. So a ton of places where you can find open educational resources, open access materials, scholarly journals, those sorts of things, other types of media, including videos, photographs, you know, a few museum collections. There is a lot more than what is on this list, but this list is here in case it is helpful. And there's a link in the chat to this list. There's also a link in the slides. You will have access to the slides along with the recording. So you don't have to furiously try to click and save all of these links. You will have access to them later. One of the biggest and easiest places to find CC licensed stuff is Openverse. This is my favorite thing in the whole world. If some of you might be familiar with Creative Commons from a while back, and you might remember CC Search. This is what CC Search has evolved into. So Creative Commons used to run a search engine just for CC licensed content. We called it CC Search. It was grant funded. It was great. The grant funding expired, and we weren't really sure what to do with it after that. We didn't have the technical resources to keep it going, but luckily we talked to the folks at WordPress, and they were really interested in keeping that project alive. So they took our code and they added to it and improved it, and they now host it on this website. They've called it Openverse. This is like the old CC Search, but new and improved. The cool thing about Openverse is that you have access to more than 700 million creative works. But what I really like is that it lets you search by type of content, including like audio, which is really cool. I used to work with students at my university who wanted to create videos. And they were like, oh, wouldn't it be cool? Like on TikTok, I can just put any song on top of a video, and it's TikTok, so no one really cares that we're breaking copyright law. But you know, maybe you don't want to do that for something for class or for something that you're going to put out on the open internet. So say I want to find some audio clips about fair use. I can search fair use, and it'll give me all these cool audio clips. Maybe these are podcast episodes. Some of them might be actual CC licensed music that I can then overlay onto a film that I'm making, or a video, or use as the intro music for my podcast. And you can filter here. Maybe you want to make sure you can use it commercially. So you can filter out, okay, I just want things that don't have an NC license because I want to be able to use it commercially. Or maybe you want things that are only in the public domain. So I'm just going to look for things with the public domain mark or with, whoops, well, I couldn't find things with just the public domain mark. I wanted to do the public domain mark or CC0. Let's see if there's anything with CC0. Hey, yes, so we have some things that have been dedicated to the public domain. You can also search just for images. So one of the neat things I'll show you, a lot of people are really comfortable with Google Images, Google image search. And when you go to Google image search and you search for something, let's say puppies, I really like puppies. Look at all these adorable puppies. Not everybody realizes that there are tools you can use to narrow down your search, both in regular Google, but Google image search specifically lets you search by usage rights here. And it will show you things that just have Creative Commons licenses. This is made possible because of that machine readable metadata layer that we talked about last week, how the licenses are made. There's those 3 layers, the lawyer layer, the human layer, and the machine readable layer. That machine readable layer is how Google knows these are CC licensed. Now, Google's not always perfect at this. There isn't a human kind of vetting these results. So you do still need to do your due diligence. You know, before you use an image, you should go to the source and make sure, you know, oh, is it actually CC licensed or is it pulled from some random website and I can't find a license on it? But this is usually pretty good. I actually prefer doing image searches in Openverse because they do a little bit more vetting than Google does. And they actually will break it down by type of CC license, which is a thing Google can't do. Google just lumps all the CC licenses together. But in Openverse, if I'm looking specifically for something that, you know, images that are CC0, I can do that. Or if I want specifically images that are licensed CC by ND, I can do that. And the nice thing here is, you know, it tells you exactly what the license is. It tells you exactly where the source is. So this comes from Flickr. This great Siberian Husky puppy picture, which is clearly licensed CC by the little person symbol, ND with the little no derivative symbol. So I like to talk about Openverse any chance I get because a lot of people don't realize that it exists. I hear from folks all the time, like when I go to conferences, hey, whatever happened to CC search? I really miss it. And I'm really excited because I get to tell people it's still kind of here. We just call it Openverse now. And CC doesn't really run it, but we're really glad it exists and we try to help them whenever we can. So definitely take a look there. It is primarily useful for like images and audio. That's kind of what it does right now. It doesn't have a ton of other types of content. Usually for a lot of text-based content, it's pretty easy to just kind of Google and find what you need. And it's usually pretty obvious if there's a license on it or not. But one of the reasons that this project started is because especially searching for images, if you couldn't find what you were looking for on Flickr, it was really hard to find CC licensed multimedia. So this was started. And all Openverse content, yeah, is either CC licensed or in the public domain. And there's a ton of more info if anyone wants to nerd out about, you know, their sources or their API. They used to have video search on here, but I don't see it anymore. So that might not be working at the moment, or they might be doing something else with it. There are some video sites that also allow you to search. So YouTube does have a filter similar to the one we saw on Google image search that will let you search for by Creative Commons license. But again, it doesn't get granular. You can't decide which CC license to search by. And sometimes it doesn't always tag things 100% correctly, but it's usually a good place to start. That was a real kind of brief overview of sort of where to find CC licensed content. Does anyone have questions about that specifically? Kind of, where can I find CC licensed stuff? How do I know I can use it? You do. put those questions in the chat or in the Q&A box, and we'll make sure we get to them. In the meantime, I'm going to move on to a slightly different topic. It's still about using CC licensed work. One of the things we talked about when we talked about all the different licenses is all 6 CC licenses have this CC BY condition. So the little person in the circle, right? That BY icon, BY, which stands for attribution. So every CC license, actual, one of those 6 licenses requires attribution. This is very similar to academic citation. Most of you are probably naturally doing this already. If you're using somebody else's work, you should give them credit for it, right? We teach our students as young as elementary school that, if you're using somebody else's work, you need to cite your sources. Otherwise, it's plagiarism. Plagiarism is bad. The licenses also require something very similar to a citation, which is called an attribution. Not only is it a good idea for ethical reasons and so that you're not plagiarizing other people's work, but in the case of the licenses, it's actually a legal requirement. If you are using a license that has that BY condition on it, then you are legally required to attribute your sources. And we used to get a lot of questions about, well, how exactly do I do that? Is an attribution the same as a citation? Should it be different? Should I format it somehow different? So we came up with this neat little acronym that we think this is the best way to think about an attribution statement. A thorough and really good attribution statement should include all 4 of the things you see listed on your screen. And we use the acronym TASL as a shorthand to remember these things. So T stands for title of the work. Not every work you find is going to have a title. But certainly if you're using a journal article or a book or a chapter from a book, many pictures. So I wonder if I can get that Flickr image back, if my browser will remember my Siberian Husky puppy. It's not a very descriptive title. Actually, it is quite descriptive. It tells you exactly what it is. A lot of times on websites, just sort of the name of the website, or clearly I would call this the title of the picture, Siberian Husky puppy. That's what I would consider the title for this picture. So usually there's something obvious like that. If you can't find a title, don't worry about it. You can only include the information you have, but you would include the title, then you would include the author. Here we very helpfully have a real name on this Flickr profile. A lot of times, especially like if you're using images from Flickr, you won't have like a regular first and last name here. You'll just have a Flickr username. That's fine. Use the Flickr username. That is the person's, that's the information you have. That is the author's name. So, if Jeffrey Bial didn't have their full name here and it just had, looks like their user ID is Denver Jeffrey. So if it just said Denver Jeffrey, great, that's your author name. If there is no author identified, you could instead list the publisher or sort of the name of the website where you found it, that sort of thing. We always recommend that people include the source for where they found the work that they're using. So in this case, this would be the web address for Flickr. I would just go up here to my browser bar and I would cut and paste that somewhere in my attribution. And we're going to see some examples of attributions in just a second. But having the link there, it helps other people find your work, find this work. So maybe I included this adorable picture of this husky puppy somewhere in an article that I wrote, and somebody else sees it and sees that it's CC licensed, and they're like, I'd really love to go download that picture of that husky puppy and go use it in this cool art that I'm making. If I have the link right there, it's very easy for them to follow it and to say, okay, cool. Here's my husky puppy picture. Now I can download it. And very importantly, the L in TASL is that you need to specify which license this was published under, or whatever the legal terms are that you're using the work under. So this we know is licensed CC by ND, so I would put that in my attribution statement. We have a wiki page that I have just put in the chat and that I will open on my screen here, where we walk through in greater detail our recommendations for how to do a good attribution, and why. So this gives you some more examples, walks you through Tassel and how it works. Now, the CC license the CC licenses ask you to be reasonable. You might find, for example, that you don't have all of the information that is needed for Tassel. And in that case, the most reasonable thing you can do is include whatever information you have, and you did your best. That's okay. It's also important to know that the licenses don't specify exactly how you should give attribution. So one of the questions that I get a lot from folks who are working their way through our online courses is, I'm making a PowerPoint presentation and I'm using pictures in it. Where do I put the attribution I'm using? Should I put it on the actual slide? Should I put it in the notes of the PowerPoint slide? Can I just put it on like a references slide at the very end, where I just list everything that I used in my presentation, kind of like a works cited page or bibliography? And the answer is any of those are okay. So long as it's clear, so that somebody looking at the thing you've made can clearly tell that this thing you're using is not your work, and that it is in fact this person's work, and they can clearly figure out where that attribution should go. It's totally fine. You can have it at the end of your document or your presentation. You can put it in the middle, whatever is most clear for your users. And you will see a variety of different places where that attribution goes. And all of those are legally okay. So a lot of folks, we have a lot of information about attribution, especially for folks outside of academia who maybe aren't used to doing this. It can be helpful. But if any of you are publishing your own papers, or writing things for scholarly journals, if you remember back to when you were in graduate school for librarianship, or in your undergrad or even high school writing research papers and doing all those works cited pages at the end, a citation gets you most of the way to an attribution. Usually the only thing that a standard citation format wouldn't force you to include is what the actual license is. So if you have, most standard citations in APA format or MLA format or Chicago format or whatever format you're being asked to use, will include the title, the author. Many of them will even ask you to include a hyperlink if it's an online resource, or a DOI for where to find that article. So then you already did most of the work of an attribution. You just need to also include the license. You can usually tack that on to the end of your citation. You've got the title, the author, how you accessed the thing with the link, and then you say CC by 4.0, or this item, used under the following license. So some additional examples here. Here's a photo of some CC cupcakes. Here's a really good example of an attribution. Hopefully you can see me highlighting this on my screen. Why is this a good attribution? Because it has all the elements of Tassel. So it has a title. The title even links you to where to find the thing. So there's our source. Links you to the original Flickr page. Great. We have an author clearly identified here. This also links to the author's Flickr profile page. This is really great. It's kind of going the extra step, but I recommend it, especially if you find something online from someone who has a website or otherwise has a really clear way to identify themselves. Include it. Great. And this image is licensed under CC by 4.0, and we also even have a link to what that license actually is on the CC website. Here is the URL. So maybe somebody doesn't know what CC by 4.0 means, they can just click and find out. Here's an example of like an okay attribution, but it's not great. So again, if we go through Tassel, there's a title, and there's not really a title here. We just called it photo. Now, if we look at the original Flickr page, maybe it didn't have a title. In this case, it does, but maybe it didn't have a title. So, if you're using an image that doesn't have a clear title, okay, you can just call it photo. You can say this photo. At least the source is linked, so that's nice. The author is clearly named. I'd love to see a link to that author if they have a website or a Flickr profile I can link to, but maybe they don't, so that's fine. And we've clearly marked that it's CC BY and we've linked to the license. So, okay. Ideally we would specify, exactly which version of the license it is. It's 4.0, because there's been other versions over the years. But it's not incorrect to say it's CC BY. It's just not as detailed as it could be. And here's just an attribution that is not correct, but that you see all the time. I see these all the time. Where it'll just say photo, Creative Commons, or it'll say photo, Wikipedia. Again, if we go through Tassel, there's no title, just this photo. And there's no link to the source, so we can't even give credit for that. Like, there's really just no way to know what this photo is or where it came from. The author is not listed. In fact, the way this is written, people are going to think Creative Commons is the author, but CC as an organization did not take this photograph. Timothy Vollmer did. So this giving credit where credit is due. And there's no mention of a license or which license it is. It's another mistake people commonly make is I talk to people who don't realize that there are 6 different CC licenses and they are all different. So it's not enough to just say Creative Commons license. Which one? Is it CC BY? Is it CC BY SA? Is it CC BY ND? Because those all mean very different things. So similarly, I'll often see photo, Wikipedia. Okay, I mean, you downloaded it from Wikipedia, but that's not who the author of the photo is. And if you don't even give me a link on where to find it, then there's no hope of me ever finding this image or being able to reuse it or being able to verify that it has a license or anything else. So attribution is really important. We also have some examples here. If you adapt a work slightly, we often request that folks mention that in their attribution statement. So here's that same photograph, but we cropped it slightly. So we just made a note along with our attribution that this is cropped from the original. If you're making a full adaptation, it's actually really important that you include how you adapted the work. So here's a full adaptation. We have completely taken this image and we have adapted it into something totally new and original and different. So now we have this new work that we created, which we've called 90fied, is adapted from, here's my full attribution of Timothy Vollmer's cupcake picture. My new work, so here's, the old work is licensed under CC BY. This new work I made is also licensed under CC BY. So kind of important to let people know how you're using the things you're using. And then this keeps going on, attributions for music, audio recordings, video recordings, text. We have a lot of examples here for how you can do that. Some of you might remember from our time talking about the public domain that technically when something enters the public domain, there are no rules anymore. There are no copyrights, including attribution rights. You don't have to give attribution to public domain works, but we really encourage you to do it anyway. Again, if you're writing a paper and you're using public domain works, you still need to cite those works. Otherwise, it's plagiarism. We still want to give credit where credit is due to authors. That's just sort of an important cultural thing that we've decided on. It's kind of an ethical social norm. So even though attribution isn't a legal requirement for public domain works, we think of it as an ethical requirement. There are some cases where people have asked not to be attributed. Okay, great, that's fine. But in general, it's useful to tell people that you didn't paint this painting, Vermeer did back in the 1600s. I got it from the Rijksmuseum, which is great, and that it's in the public domain. There's a similar page here that I'm not going to walk through. I just had it. Excuse my scrolling. Close your eyes for a second if you get motion sickness. About how to mark your own work with a CC license. I'm just going to put this link in the chat for you guys to look at later. But if you are actually creating works, creating adaptations, similar to attributions, so long as you're marking your work somewhere and I can clearly find it, great. But some people really want more specific guidance than that. Like, exactly where should I put my license? And we have some examples of, in videos, you can actually embed a bumper onto your video. We have places you can download some pre-made CC video bumpers. Or you can just put it sort of in the notes page on your YouTube page. So long as a user can clearly find it. Okay, back to Tassel. All right, I always talk more than I think I'm going to talk more, but here's an opportunity for you folks. I'm hoping you have your chat boxes ready and your typing fingers ready. Because I didn't do an official poll, we're just gonna talk in the chat. I want to know if you all think that this image on your screen has a good attribution with it. So in the chat space, let me know if you think this has all those elements we just talked about of a good attribution. Think of that TASSEL acronym. Is everything there that we'd ideally like to see there? I was gonna say, and if not, let me know what you think is missing. And we got right away some folks letting us know, we don't know the author. That's a very good point. Does anyone see anything else? So, I mean, you folks would not know this on your Zoom screen. Baby Elephants is a link. It does take me to the source, so that's great. We've got the title and the source, but you're right, we're missing the author, and the author is clearly noted here on the Flickr page. I should be saying that, this is by Paul. I don't need to know Paul's full name. He's clearly attributed themselves here as Paul. So that's what I just need to put. Baby Elephants by Paul. We've said here it's a beautiful black and white photograph. I mean, that's great. You can include it if you want, but not necessary. Saying the year that it was made is not part of Tassel, but it's helpful information if you'd like to include it. If you're adapting citations into attributions, the year's already going to be there. You can leave it in, totally fine. More information is not necessarily bad. And we do at least have the license here and a link to the license. Now this is an older photo, so it was licensed to CC by 2.0. So we linked to the 2.0 version. In case anyone's interested, they can find the 4.0 version. The versions all do the same thing. It's just we've updated some of the legal language over the years just to make it a little more clear. So that was great. That was an easy one. We're gonna do one more of these. How does this attribution look? The attribution is in some ugly colors. I will tell you that these are links. They look like they go to the right places. I've got an okay kind of thumbs up. I don't know, what do we think? Anything missing here? We didn't talk about how beautiful the photograph was. That's a bummer. Do we need to talk about how beautiful the photograph is? It is quite pretty. There's a question about the year. The year is not required for a Tassel attribution, but it's not a bad idea. So this is a good Tassel attribution. We have a title. We have an author clearly identified. We have a link to the source. Here it is. It's another Flickr photo. This was cropped from the original, clearly, and we did not note that. Was it, was it cropped? I guess it's not cropped. It's just resized. I take that back. We've clearly linked to the license. There is a year here, so it, if you want to say, this image uploaded 2017 or from 2017, it can be useful to include that. Again, not required, certainly not a legal requirement. But if it's already in your citation, keep it because it's useful for your user to know, wait, how old is this thing? Do I actually want to use it or do I want to look for something more up to date? There's a question about should resizing be noted? It is a change. I typically note it. It's kind of a gray area, whether it's really required. And I think in the case of Flickr, when you get the option to download in a number of sizes, so it's probably just downloaded in one of the smaller sizes. But I might say, resized from the original or cropped from the original if it's cropped. But yeah, this has all the elements that we talked about, which is great. Okay, I promised more discussion, so I'm going to move right along to the part where the slides get really boring, but where the information hopefully gets even more helpful. So we talked about kind of how to find CCWorks, how to use CCWorks. We've talked a little bit about how the CC licenses themselves work, why they're important. But presumably you might want to share some of this newfound knowledge that you've learned in this webinar series with your colleagues. You might want to talk about it with other librarians or faculty at your institutions or with patrons who are interested in creating their own works or finding things that they can legally use when they're making art or presentations for school or for work. So you're going to get, again, I recommend looking at these slides because there's a lot of notes here with a lot of links. But one of the things we get asked a lot is sort of how can I encourage people to use open institutions and my material use open materials at my institution. I think open education and open access are really important. How can I spread the word? So this is where if you have ideas of things you can do in your own institution, I would love to hear those in the chat. I'm going to run down some things that we have seen people do in the past that may or may not be useful for you to adapt in your own community. So just raising awareness of the existence of open access materials and OER. So Open Education Week is a global thing. We just had it the first week of March. Maybe next year at your institution, you host an event during Open Education Week, or you link to the Open Education Week website and just let people know. There's also a Fair Use Week, I think that was in April, if I remember. If you Google these, you can find there's sorts of kind of concentrated efforts you can latch onto. One of the things we do here at CC is we help institutions create policy. So again, I'm going to talk to the academics in the room, but maybe your faculty senate has a committee dedicated to open education, or maybe they'd be interested in starting one. Maybe there should be, some sort of task force where you get students and faculty and accessibility experts and the bookstore and the dean and the library together to talk about, how can we use more open materials. We just did a week-long version of our certificate courses with the California Community College system last year. And it's a statewide system of, I can't remember how many community colleges are in it, 100 or so. California is a very big state. And, they are working on sorts of these initiatives. They have these ZTC pathways, which stands for zero textbook cost, where they're trying to make more and more courses accessible to students who don't have money to spend hundreds of dollars on textbooks that they're only going to use once and then throw away. So what open education materials can we use instead? If you are in a place that's lucky enough to have funding, I know I live in Pennsylvania. Penn State has a really nice grant program, for example, for librarians and faculty members who want to use more OER in their classrooms. And so they can get a little bit of funding to develop OER materials, to author their own, or to find something out there that they can reuse and adapt. So if you are at an institution that's considering doing something like that, think about the types of content that you fund, think about the sorts of projects that you develop. So a lot of institutions have sort of created these OER grant programs. Think about existing strategic documents, existing goals that your institution has. So for example, a lot of universities have a goal of increasing student retention, for example. They want, more students to stay students. And one of the ways to do that is to make learning more affordable. Using open educational materials means students have access to their course materials on day one, which means fewer dropouts during add drop periods. And it means decreasing student debt, decreasing time to degree, all sorts of those things. Make it easy to find and share OER. You'll see lots of LibGuides, lots of librarians making resources available on their websites or guides for their communities on how to find open works. One of the things I used to love to do when I was in the public library is I had a lot of patrons that came in asking for medical information. I don't know what it is about a public library, but it seems that everybody wants to come in and use the computers to Google the strange mole on their arm, which is fine. I do that all the time. I often, in the privacy of my own home, I'm like, what is this weird thing on my leg? And I used to show folks there are some really nice open access repositories for like reliable and authoritative medical information. That's not just WebMD or not just whatever pharmaceutical website is trying to sell you things today. But PubMed is out there. The National Institute of Health and the National Network for Libraries of Medicine, NNLM, have some really nice resources. A lot of those are open access resources. Medline has a really nice website. Used to have a magazine that I think is all digital now. That's actually, it's written at the level of just normal everyday people, but it's reliable, authoritative medical information that can be freely and openly shared. And that's super great. So having those links on your website, along with all your other electronic resources, or having those bookmarked on your public computers just makes it so much easier for folks to access them. Some additional examples. Some of these, again, are going to be a little specific to academia, but let me close some of these windows. For those of you who are in places where you're thinking about implementing more open policies, there's this really cool tool to kind of walk you through how to develop a policy for your institution. Maybe you're not somebody who's ever written policy before, but you'd love to bring something to your dean or to your director or to your boss. There's Creative Commons New Zealand put together. This is another policy template, but this is kind of a really handy guide for, well, that link didn't work. Apologies. We'll find it, fix it. But they put together a guide to just automatically give teachers at their institutions advance permission to CC license all the stuff they make. That, like, just by default, you have permission to CC license your works. And that we encourage you to do so, and that we really support it. Requiring course designations in your course catalogs. So when students are registering for their courses, it's really helpful for them to know if it's a course that uses an open textbook, or if it's a course that they're going to have to pay money to buy the book for. Consider labeling open resources, or even including open resources in your OPACs, making them more visible in your website. So for example, EBSCO's discovery layer. This is going to get, if you're not a techie librarian, just tune out for a second, but EBSCO's discovery layer actually allows you to choose to include open access content. A lot of other discovery layers do this. So if you have one federated search, one search box where a patron can come in and search all of your online resources, usually that's called a discovery layer, that sort of main search portal. And a lot of those will give you the option to also allow users not just to search for all that electronic stuff that you're paying too much money for, but you can also search open access content and include that in there. There are also many plugins that you can use on your public computers, or just install more generally. So that will help folks find open access versions of quality research. So Unpaywall is a good example of this. The open access button. A lot of these are available as browser extensions. I used to just have I had them in my Chrome. So if I'm Googling around, I find an article on the internet, it's hosted on some publisher's website that says, pay me $49 to access this article. I can just go click on that Unpaywall button, and Unpaywall will find that article. If it's available as an open access version somewhere for free, Unpaywall will find it for me and give me the link. At some of the libraries I've had, we've also used, there are some tech products that you can kind of pay for. So Third Iron is a company that makes products called LibKey and LibPass. You might have heard of some of these that also make it easier for patrons who are using your library resources, or who are on your website, or who even never go to your library website, but are out there searching on the open web for scholarly content or just good quality content. This will help them find open access versions of those things. Also, I'll direct you real quick to our certificates page. So a big part of my job is running our Creative Commons certificate courses. These are 10-week asynchronous online courses that kind of do a deeper dive into a lot of the things we're talking about over the course of this webinar series. But all of our course materials are openly available. You can download them from this website. And also on this website, all of the assignments that students make during those courses, we ask them to practice CC licensing. So we ask them to actually mark their work with a CC license and make it openly available. And we give them the option to share it with the wider world if they would like to. So also on this page, you will find links to documents where we have collected these shared assignments. And you can find tons of infographics, slide presentations, videos. Some are really creative, really informative stuff. Lots of LibGuides on there. So if you need help finding or creating advocacy materials, you want to run a workshop on how CC works to let your community know, or you just want to send, somebody came in and they're interested in learning more about how this works. You want to send them some ideas. Some more examples. Some things that have happened in real life. So we just did this boot camp in California in the fall, and we actually did a postcard activity where we asked folks to write to their legislators, asking them to support open access materials and open educational resources and zero textbook cost pathways to make education more affordable for everyone. And one of those postcards actually got a response. That librarian got a phone call from their legislator who said, I would love to talk more about this. I want to learn more about how this works and what we can do. And they got to have a really nice sit down for 30 minutes or so with people who, can actually make a difference on a legislative level, can actually institute policies, which is really cool. There's this really great book about real world examples of open in the wild. It's called Open Pedagogy Approaches. Again, it skews a little more academic, but a lot of these things can sort of apply anywhere. And then, I talked a little bit about that shared assignment, those shared assignments that we make available on our website. And I just want, again, you'll have access to these in the slides, but these were some of my recent favorites that I pulled and wanted to share with you folks. There's a whole guide on Creative Commons for teachers, K-12 teachers, higher ed teachers. There's a whole guide to how to develop open content within a public cultural organization. So this person is actually in, I can't remember if it's a museum or an archive, but a type of cultural heritage institution. And they wrote a really detailed kind of guide and pathway for here's exactly how to do this. There's a nice LibGuide about publishing with a CC license. So again, sometimes I get folks, walk into the public library and, hey, I wrote a book and I want to publish it. What are my options? I don't know what I'm doing here. Well, one option is to publish it openly online with a CC license. And here's a nice guide on how to do that. So some of the big takeaways basically are that you're not doing this work alone. CC has an open education platform, an open culture platform. Both of those platforms are places where folks doing work similar to you kind of get together and talk through challenges and opportunities. There are countless listservs and forums where you can talk to folks who are successfully doing this work. And I just realized that I've taken up almost all the time. So we do have a minute or two. This is just some more information about how to get more involved in CC. Some of those links you've already seen. This is my contact information. I'm going to put my email address in the chat. If anyone has questions, thoughts, do feel free to put those in the Q&A or in the chat. If you're wondering more about, how do I actually use the CC stuff? How do I convince other people that this CC stuff is actually useful and important? I'm happy to help. And while you're thinking about those questions and putting them in the chat, I will also note here that we have one more webinar in our series coming up next week. That one's on the future of open licensing and Creative Commons. And this one will be very interesting. If you're attending next week, definitely attend with your participation hat ready to go, because we have some kind of a variety of topics we think people might be interested in. AI, for example, everybody wants to know about artificial intelligence and what that's doing with copyright. Data is another really big one. People working with scientists who have a lot of questions about data. There's some weird copyright stuff. But we're basically going to be asking you, what do you want to know next week about the future of open licensing and CC? And we're going to go in whatever direction you tell us to go in. So stay tuned for that. It's going to be really exciting. I'll be here next week with my colleague, Jenren Wetzler, so it won't just be me talking at you for an hour. But I don't see any questions in the Q&A or in the chat. Folks can feel free to email me, but I think what I'm going to do is stop it there and turn things back over to Kirsten to kind of close us out. Thank you all for your time and attention today. Thank you for the great participation in the chat. And if you do have questions later on, don't hesitate to let me know.
Thank you so much, Shayna. That was a ton of information. And thanks for all the links in the chat too. And yes, those will all be in the materials that'll be distributed along with the video. I'm going to share my screen once more. Maybe. There we go. Right. Thank you, Shayna Holick. Thank you to Mia Blickshan for supporting us, the core webinar technical support. And thank you also to the core continuing ed office staff, Julie Reese and Tom Farron. You can reach them at corece@ala.org. We are looking for additional members of all of our core committees. Go to ala.org/core, and you can find all the committees and all the volunteer opportunities. We've got upcoming core classroom and e-forums and webinars. You can find them at our calendar here, ala.org/core/CE/calendar. And as Shayna, as Shayna mentioned, on April 2nd, the fourth of our series, The Future of Open Licensing and Creative Commons. Looking forward to that. Thank you all so much for attending this webinar. Do follow up with any questions that you have. You can send them directly to Shayna. You can bring them to the next webinar. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Shayna. And we'll see everybody next week. Oh, wait, before I go, Abby says, thank you. You're very welcome, Abby. All right. Everybody have a wonderful rest of your day.